Welcome back to Evening Plus. Thanks for sticking with us here. I've told you sometimes in the past about all of the incredible research that's happening at Michigan State University, and tonight we're going to talk about another topic of research that's underway that has to do with circadian rhythms, which most of us associate with our sleep cycle, but control a lot more than that, and how that can potentially play a role in the labor process for women when giving birth to a baby. So I'm joined here by MSU professor, scientist, and lead author of the study we're going to be talking about, Hannah Hoffman. Hannah, thank you so much for being here to talk about this. This is really quite complex of a study to talk about, but I think it's so interesting, especially for anyone who has had a baby, is planning to have a baby, knows someone who's planning to have a baby. So to really simplify what we're talking about, you looked into, circadian rhythms, which again, most of us think, when my body naturally wants to fall asleep, but there's so much more to it, what those control, and then how that can kind of be connected to the labor process. So if you want to start us off with kind of a brief overview of what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, so our rhythms are these 24 rhythms, right? And as you said, we really associate them with kind of going to bed, but really waking up. You will wake up in the morning naturally, and that's thanks to these rhythms. What many people might not know is that actually every single cell of our body have their own little internal clock. So even if you're in constant darkness, let's say you go way up north, you'll still wake up in the morning about the same time every day, and that's thanks to these internal clocks. And they control close to everything in your body. So I'm really interested in women's health and reproduction and child well-being. So that's kind of where I looked at it to see how does, these clocks, specifically in the uterus, which is, the tissue or that covers, around the baby, right? And you have a muscle in there. So how are these muscles in the uterus important for labor, of course, but how are the clocks in these muscles, regulating the whole labor and delivery process?
Yeah, and so what you looked into is, kind of combining the science of your circadian rhythms and in each of your cells kind of having their own clock, like you mentioned, with the induction process. Many may be familiar with that, but ultimately, beginning the laboring process, maybe with the help of medicine, or maybe just begin that naturally. And when someone is induced, that can be any time of the day, but how the time of day that maybe someone chooses, a doctor chooses for that time, can play a role in matching up or not matching up with those circadian rhythms, and then how that impacts just how long you're laboring for. Correct me if I mismatched any of that.
That's all correct. So right now, almost all studies in the field have really been looking at efficacy at the hospital, making sure we have enough staff. But what they forget is that there are these clocks in the body, and birth naturally, if you have unassisted spontaneous labor, it usually happens in the evening that you go into labor, and you will usually give birth at 4:30. So most babies are born in the early morning. Not all. Babies are born all the times of the day, but most are born in the early morning. So most work has really focused on how can we make this process, efficient from the hospital side. And they have forgotten the woman in all this. At least the clocks in her body. When does her body really respond to all these different ways of inducing her? So there's not one way to induce. There's many different ways they use to kind of, speed the process up. But we found that independent of what approach they used to induce women, where we had a specific interest in something called oxytocin, it's a hormone you naturally produce that kind of triggers the contractions, that the woman's body just responded better. And when I say responded better, it means that from the time they initiated the induction till the time the baby was delivered, this time was shortened by up to 7 hours.
Wow.
If you've been in labor, you will appreciate 7 hours less of being in labor.
Absolutely.
And this is on average. Some women, of course, had much greater reductions in labor durations, and some didn't.
And so the big finding, too, with all of this was that induction earlier on in the day compared to later on or overnight is what ended up seeing this reduction in labor time. Is that correct?
Yeah, that really surprised us because I thought that labor induction would follow the natural rhythm. But then I came around and it's like, well, if you didn't go into spontaneous labor or it wasn't kind of like as efficient as you would like, of course it's not going to be the time of day that the body would naturally do it. And we found that for most women, and actually women with higher BMI, gestational diabetes, and particularly first-time moms, they really benefited of these early morning inductions. So it's between like around 6 a.m., but this, depending on who you are, let's say between 3 a.m. and 9 a.m. is really when we see the greatest reduction. For across the board, women should advocate for themselves and try to avoid getting induced around midnight.
Interesting, interesting. And that was going to be my next question, because we know, the longer you're laboring for, risks of all sorts of things go up, whether you have those additional things you're dealing with, gestational diabetes, being a first-time mom, but regardless, the risks can go up the longer you're in the labor process for, and ultimately just more enjoyable the less time that it takes. And so for women who are hearing this right now, okay, maybe I'm pregnant, maybe I'm thinking of having a baby, and I want to speak up for myself, what should they say? Why is this so important? What should they take with them here from this information?
Yeah, I mean, especially for first-time moms, labor is really long in general. So speak with their provider, right, and talk about, what should I come in with, what kind of expectation, right? Many first-time moms will be in labor for a day and a half. So go in with realistic expectations to how long it would be and ask them, is there an option if I need labor induction to have it initiated in the early morning instead of the evening? This study was just published. So also help their providers know about it, because there's a lot of research being published and they might simply not have time to read it yet.
Yeah.
So they can also make them aware of this study and kind of say, listen, there's new research that shows that I might benefit from morning induction. Is this possible?
Absolutely. All right. Well, that is going to do it for us tonight. Hannah, thank you so much for coming in, talking about this. It's fascinating work, and hopefully we taught some folks at home something that they can bring with them, to their next experience. So thank you so much for coming in to chat about this.